This is the first Blender session, and here I'm just going to set up Blender and configure a few things so that we're ready to do this cloaking animation. The first thing I like to do over here in my collections in the upper right is name this first collection. So I double clicked on it. I'm going to rename this Lights and Cameras. And I like to keep this stuff separate from the objects and the stuff in my scene, so I can also turn it off if I want to. Then down here, I'm going to right click and create a new collection. Collections are like folders where we can keep stuff. And I'll call this Cloak Scene. Then this cube, we can delete. So I'm just going to delete that. Some other things we need to do is our render settings. The ambient occlusion, depending what we draw, it won't help so much for the waves, but if we draw things with corners, with shadows and lighting and that kind of stuff, the ambient occlusion can help that. The other thing we'll turn on is bloom. Whenever, I shouldn't say whenever, but almost always when I visualize electromagnetic waves, I like to do that with a dark black background. And I like to have the waves emit, and the bloom effect gives it a little bit of a glow that you may or may not like. I usually like it depending what I'm doing. The next thing we'll want to do is come down here under Film, and we're going to click Transparent. And what that will do when we render something, all of the stuff will get imaged, but where there's not stuff, the image becomes transparent. Now, we don't actually want it to be transparent. In a later step, we're going to replace that with black. And something else I'll mention here under color management. Sometimes this AGX looks really nice, but sometimes when you insert graphics into something with a pure black background or a pure white background, Blender does not produce perfect white and black. In which case, you can change that to standard. I'm going to keep it with AGX because if that doesn't bother you, this really does create a better color effect. So that's it. So we really didn't do anything under color management. I just wanted to point that out. The next thing we'll do is go to the compositor. And what happens in the compositor, it renders, and then the compositor does a bunch of stuff with the renders. So it's manipulating those after the renders have happened. There's a lot more to compositing that we're not going to get into. But we want to check this box to use nodes. And when we render something, it comes out here. We have a whole bunch of different nodes that we can manipulate. We can blur things and all kinds of stuff, but it's going immediately to the output. And so nothing's happening right now. I want to go to Add, and I'm going to type alpha over, and that's the quickest way I've found to identify these nodes. So I'm going to click on the alpha over, and a node pops up. And the alpha channel, or where the image is transparent, is called the alpha, and we're going to replace the transparency with black. And so the alpha over node does that. So the image node, I'm just going to move this to the bottom image input. And so the top one is what we will be replacing the transparency with. And so I'm going to make that black. And feel free, if you have another color you want to put there, you can certainly do that. And this pre-multiply field, we're going to set to 1. And that's it. We'll go back to the Layout tab. And the last thing we'll do in this video is set up the object over which we'll calculate these waves so that we can see everything. So go ahead and click this collection. If we don't do that and we create an object, it could load it into one of these other collections. Not a big deal because we could just move it over, but select the Cloak Scene collection. Then we're going to go over to Add Mesh Plane. And we're going to use this to calculate our wave, and this will show us the wave in the XY plane. Well, there's two other planes that we may want to see the wave. So I'm going to click on that and hit Shift D and then Enter. So that duplicates that plane. So we got two planes overlapping each other. And what I'll do is we have the second plane selected in this tree in the upper right. And in rotation around the x-axis, I'm going to type in a 90. So we rotate it 90 degrees. Now we'll be able to see the wave in the XZ plane. Well, there's one more plane. So with this plane selected, I can Shift D, enter, and that creates another plane that's overlapping my plane in the XZ plane. So I'm going to go over here to the Z rotation and type in 90. And finally, that last one rotates. Then I'm going to select all three planes over here. And I could also drag and drop or do a square hash select here. I'll do what I'm talking about. I could do that to select all the planes too. Now I'm going to type Control J. And what that does is it joins them all into one object. And this is the object we're going to use to calculate our wave. And I find this to be the nicest way when I'm calculating waves. So it's a rather simple object, but I can orbit around and see different things. And if we want to name it something else, so we'll call this, how about cloak wave. And at this point, let's save our Blender file. I won't actually save it here. I'll save it off camera. But go ahead and save your Blender file, and we'll save it after each one of these Blender sessions. So that is it for this session. I will see you in the next one.